Hello everyone, and welcome to our InContext Connect webinar series. Today's webinar is hosted by InContext Solutions and R4 Technologies. I'm Isabel Grant, and I'm thrilled to have you all here, whether you're one of our valued clients or joining us from across the industry. Today's session topic is Fail Fast, Learn Faster. Our panelists will be discussing how to embrace failure, how AI is changing the way we learn from failure, and how we can learn to adopt AI. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that we are recording today's session and we'll email it to you afterwards so you can re-listen or share it with your colleagues. You are all muted. However, if you do have any questions, I'd encourage you to use the chat function and we will aim to address these throughout the webinar. On that note, I want to introduce you to our speakers today. Rich Scamehorn, co-founder and chief data officer at InContext Solutions, and Dave Bradley, Executive Vice President of Solutions and Chief Marketing Officer at R4 Technologies. It's great to have you both here today. Starting with Rich, would you like to give a little introduction to yourself?
Thanks, Isabel. As she mentioned, I'm Rich Scamehorn. I'm the Chief Data Officer at InContext Solutions and one of the co-founders. Most of you who are familiar with InContext will know us as a virtual store research company. Founded in 2009, we've been doing that this is our 17th year now. We've done over 2 million shopping trips in virtual store research. But over the last couple of years, we've been transitioning to reposition our way into more spaces, so including retail execution and retail planning. So we're doing that by leveraging virtual technologies, augmented reality technologies, and AI tools, of course. So for the augmented reality, we're building retail execution tools around the placement of store displays and signage. We're also building and launching products around being able to use your mobile device to capture planograms directly by taking an image and using computer vision models to create that into a planogram. And then ultimately that can be used for compliance. So those are the AR tools that we have launched recently for retail compliance. On the retail planning side, we've launched Arrangement AI, which is under my purview. And that tool is using our historical observed sales data that also happens to have attached to it the planogram in which that sale occurred, which allows us to variabilize those shelving principal variables. And that really provides a level of accuracy in the predictive and prescriptive AI models that we've built that for arrangement has not been possible before without that information. So that is an expansion of our capabilities, both on the retail planning side, but also with extending the research side a little bit. In addition to that, we've added to our research capabilities, we've added test and learn on online shopping, which allows us to be fully omni-oriented. And we've also added category management consultant. We've added people like Kay Young and Craig Hodnett, who are industry leaders and experts in category management. And they are bringing things like consumer decision trees and the shopper path to purchase methodologies that they can use to help advise category advisors on how to better be a category advisor for their retailer partners and to get the retailers information on how they can better connect with their advisors. So we're really looking more broadly at the entire merchandising system with offerings that are more software oriented, but maintaining our core products of the virtual store research. Thanks, Izzy.
Thanks, Rich. And Dave, do you want to give an introduction to yourself and R4 Technologies?
Sure. Thank you, Izzy. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Dave Bradley. As Izzy mentioned, I'm the EVP for Solutions at R4, and my second job is as the CMO. And what it means to be responsible for solutions at R4 is really understanding the needs of customers and markets and matching that to our very cool technology. We were created as a company in 2013 by several of the founders of Priceline. including the Priceline Chief Marketing Officer and Head of Data Science. And what's significant about that is that we built our business on that Priceline DNA of understanding demand and predicting demand and turning that into better yield, whatever that concept of yield may be. And most functions I know are kind of dealing with limited resources and perishable demand, and that's actually what we see as a common theme across the world. We actually started our company really focused on math, data, and the power of cloud computing. Somewhere along the way, it became all about AI and enterprise AI, and we've been very much a participant in that journey. We've watched the evolution from tool sets to generative models to software-based systems, and that's actually where we're leading the way, and probably been a little bit ahead of that market. We got our start in consumer products and retail. In recent years, we've branched out to bring a very similar set of use cases and capability to military in terms of readiness, to state governments in terms of doing more with less. And a lot of that keys back on that same DNA of understanding demand and driving yield. We continue to work with innovators, in particular in the consumer products world. And what we've recognized is the need for an AI solution that solves some of the big unsolved problems still. If I think about whether it's a retailer or a manufacturer, there are a set of business functions that kind of exist as silos, and they were built that way, and we'll come back and talk about that a little bit later. They were built that way for good reasons, but they all could be or should be demand driven. So if I think about the role of marketing and personalization, the role of assortment management and store management and category management, and how that becomes more and more fragmented and localized. If I think about the need for supply chains to become more demand driven, especially for that last mile of precision, what we've actually created is an AI system for cross enterprise management to bring those capabilities together, to allow the left hand and the right hand to work together. And that's actually where we think we're bringing a new set of capabilities that can make a difference for the market. And looking forward to describing a little bit more about that later in this session. So thank you. Back to you, Izzy.
Oh, thanks, Dave. So let's dive into the questions. The first question I'll pass to you, Dave. Why do you think some companies struggle with embracing failure as part of the learning process?
Excuse me. I think the most important first step in embracing failure is to recognize it. And I think that a lot of companies have been failing slow, quite honestly. If you look at the articles that are being published, and this is not new, this has been going on for 4 or 5 years. We're kind of into the 8th or 9th year of enterprise AI as an era of business. And smart folks came out a number of years ago and said, if you're not really good at AI, you're going to have trouble maintaining competitiveness. What they may have said, but they probably didn't mean, was everybody thought they had to go out and build their own AI. And what we've actually watched is the first era of enterprise AI be very much about tool sets and custom development, a machine learning model at a time, and data science led in a sandbox, and not well enough connected to the business. And those have actually become root causes of a very high rate of failure, 80% failure rates consistently year up for these first years. And it's not that the machine learning models aren't spitting out the correct mathematical outputs. It's that the business isn't able to put them to use and create the results. And so the 80% failure rate that's been published consistently is the failure to meet business expectations. And I've talked to a lot of folks in your companies and others that where the business folks don't actually feel that they're getting the output that they need to create the impact. A few years ago, along came generative AI as a kind of a disruptive force, but now the headlines are 90% failure rates. And again, it's not because those language models aren't producing interesting little pockets of productivity. They're not driving enterprise value. They're not driving growth and yield. And so we actually think that the first and foremost step is to step back and say, is what we're doing fundamentally working, or do we need to move to the next generation of capability and technology to embrace the technology at its best, form of delivery, but better understand how to apply it to the business and adopt it in business processes. So we'll come back on some of that, but I do think the first step in failing fast is to recognize it, because I do think we've been failing slowly. Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that if you focus in on a particular example of that, so if we look at a process like category management, where you're trying to reset your category, for instance, I think the pressure on people to have success is exacerbated by the fact that the process is an annual one. You get one shot a year to make changes to it. And so, because of that, there's a lot of pressure on that being successful. And unfortunately, the success rate is pretty poor. It's about 15% of resets actually lift sales for the category. And when you have that high of failure rate, there's a lot of pressure on doing it right. And so the cultural norms in these organizations and the way that they think about it and plan for it has a very high threshold of pain, and because of that, it's hard to embrace failure in that process. If you fail, you don't have a chance to fix it for another year as well, and so that adds a lot of problems. It's an expensive process. The way that the restocking of the shelves is done, or the resetting of the shelves is done, is an expensive one for the retailer. And so when you get these large failure rates, that puts a lot of pressure on how they go about doing these things, and they only get it that change once a year. That really makes it hard to accept or embrace failure as part of that learning process. And so it's really important for them to get it right. All of the tools that you're talking about on the AI side are examples of things that could improve that. But part of the concern about being willing to fail fast is tied up in this culture that you just described as failing slowly. And I think they're putting an undue amount of pressure on those decisions, and that's just one example. Many of the other planning processes are similarly structured.
Great. And I think you've both kind of briefly touched on it, but how did legacy systems prevent embracing that kind of fail fast culture that you're referring to? Rich, I don't know if you want to start on this one.
Sure. Go ahead, Dave.
No, go ahead, Rich. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I think what I just described was in one particular function of category management, but there's also this issue that all organizations have, that Dave mentioned earlier, around the silos that the functions were structured with, and it leads to a lot of issues that these legacy systems ensure are problems, which is that each function might have their own data source, and they're not all sharing common data. They have separate planning processes, and they're not all collaborating with each other in the planning process. In fact, it's almost competitive at times across some of these silos, and they're not willing to share their data or help people make enterprise-wide change. And so that's a cultural thing that is embedded in these legacy systems, and the investment they made in building them in the first place, and their process is tied up in those things. And so it's really difficult to get them to step back and look at the bigger picture and say, hey, this would be a lot easier if we all work together and share the same source of truth in the data, and shared all of that responsibility, so that it would be a collaborative effort instead of struggling to make any change to it. Dave, what do you think?
I do think it's pervasive. I mean, I used to work at IBM and SAP, so I helped to build some of the silos that we live in. We built silos for very good reasons decades ago around P&L accountability for business units. We installed enterprise core systems that were meant to link those silos together on common processes, but they became data and process silos unto themselves. And I think what's happened over years is this culture. It's almost, I think, a culture of complacency that we can't fix this. The silo problem is so pervasive and so institutionalized that we have to live with it. And I think that, and it's become the culture. And I think, to me, culture is is embodied in the behavior of leaders. And what needs to happen, we believe, is that the silos actually exist for very good purposes. They've created trillions of dollars of productivity over years. Now they're actually creating $1 trillion of cost, but it's cost of missed opportunity for growth and productivity. So rather than thinking we have to rewire the business and re-implement core systems, how do we actually enable a layer of decision making that managers, leaders can actually have better view of what's going on in an external marketplace, how that affects the different parts of the business, how supply chain and category management, or supply chain and merchandising, or supply chain and store operations can better work together, how space planning and category planning can better work together, how marketing and sales and supply folks can actually come together collaboratively around a more dynamic approach to planning. That's it. In our opinion, that's about it's about creating decision advantage. And that's a little bit of what's missing, because if we can actually create better decisions together and find ways to create better alignment and collaboration across especially those functions that could be or should be driven by demand signals, which are increasingly fragmented and changing. So I think there's this, I'd like to come back to this a little bit later, Rich, when we kind of talk about actually arrangement and assortment. But what's really in the way of doing hyper-local assortment management? Is it our systems, or is it our culture? I'd like to come back on that thought, but back to you, Izzy, to the next question.
Yeah, I think that probably segues into the kind of next question I had anyway. How do you see AI transforming the way we learn from failure in retail, Dave?
I really think it's about finding the right question and the right problem to work on. We think of that as a use case, but use cases don't actually function independently in the world. Decisions about supply, decisions about assortment, decisions about promotion and pricing, decisions about new product introductions, they all have impact on the related functions. And where to promote and where to market. And, I actually had an opportunity to speak to some folks, I think maybe some of the folks on this webinar at an omnichannel conference. And omnichannel started as a marketing thing, but it's actually a business thing. We think it's really about bringing all of those customer facing functions together. So what's the right use case, and how do you actually think about that from business user perspectives? And think about, if I could get an output from an AI system that could give me a better set of predictions, a better set of answers at a more granular level, how would I apply it? How would I actually change my processes without having to rip and replace core systems? And our premise is most of that functionality exists today. So how do you actually augment those core systems with new tools and technologies that don't have to be hardwire integrated into those systems, but actually can create a layer of agility?
Rich, I don't know if you had a different opinion.
Now, I wouldn't say it's different. I agree with everything that Dave was saying, but I think that just to go a little bit further, it's those prescriptive tools from AI can really enable a shift in management process. And it's back to your cultural point. Retail has always been managed from the top down, and the shopping behavior that happens is at the store level. And so if you aren't doing something to get to that store level with that, how you're managing it, you can create problems for yourself if the opportunities in that store level are different across your different locations. And I think both from an omni perspective, online versus in the brick and mortar stores, and also within the brick and mortar stores that you have, there are various levels of opportunity for each of your individual products. And because of that, the management systems that have been applied on those types of things that you were talking about, the assortment and arrangement of products, the supply chain and support of that, the distribution centers, all of those types of things, managing those from the top down is a bit of a disconnect with your customers who have to shop at a particular store. And so I think one of the beautiful things that AI brings to the table is the ability to handle that level of complexity. It's a problem, but it's a very similar problem in each and every store or outlet that you're selling at. And because of that, the processing power that AI brings is actually a fundamentally good choice for managing that complexity. And that allows you to develop solutions that should be more successful in each iteration of that question of what should the assortment be, what should the arrangement be at each of these different locations. Because it allows you to bring in the other data that we do have that we know about, things like what the neighborhood's demographics are and what the competitive set of stores are in that market. All these things are things that should be included in the decision layer that you're talking about, Dave. And it's difficult to see a solution there that can support that doesn't utilize AI to handle that level of complexity. So I think that's what AI is really bringing to the table for the way to manage this going forward.
And let me build on what Rich said, because if people have very different perspectives on what AI is and what it can do. And if you think about this concept of a digital twin, it's been around for decades. It kind of came out of engineering, labs, digital twin of a jet engine, right, or a tank. And you need engineering level micro precision to do that. And then a lot of the world shifted to a digital twin, an AI model of a digital process. And that required lots and lots of manual cleansing of data, very pristine, narrow data to automate an industrial process. And you need sort of a Six Sigma mindset there. But what the piece that we address and what we think is missing in a lot of the discussion is a digital twin of a business ecosystem for consumers, for a retailer to see millions of consumers, or a manufacturer with an e-commerce business or a direct to consumer business to see, tens of millions of consumers, to see hundreds of thousands of product SKUs, to see tens of thousands of store locations as a retailer, or hundreds of thousands of store locations as a manufacturer, and have that all joined together, not as a set of UPC codes and a set of store numbers or consumer IDs, but as bundles of attributes. And that's what's different about this next generation of AI for decision advantage is to be able to marry together that unified view of demand through a consumer perspective, a store perspective, and a supply chain availability perspective, and bring all that together to envision different kinds of scenarios. And that's what I think has been missing in a lot of the discussion, is how do I actually begin to see myself in the context of actual granular patterns of demand. And this was where I think it really comes to bear on this discussion of assortment and arrangement, and this whole topic of hyperlocal retail, which I know has been around for a long time as a trend and an idea in the discussion. But a year ago, year and a half ago, we're talking to very senior leaders on the retail side that said, I know we need to do this. I know that this hyperlocal phenomenon exists, that these demand patterns are explained by neighborhood level differences, not regional differences. And I know that we need to figure out how to do this, but we just haven't cracked the code in the economics of it. And that's why we want manufacturers to help. And this idea of how do I actually think about going to take on that large complex problem, knowing I can't solve it all, maybe ever, but I can start to peel it apart. I can go after the 20% of stores that have 80% of the opportunity. I can begin to think about them. This is this notion of understanding target audiences and business cohorts that have different value to me, and thinking about how do I align the functions of my business around market opportunities, not around functional domains. And that's where I think this notion of cross-enterprise management and leadership actually come into play. And this is where we think a new type of technology will make a difference there, though. But I think it's really defining the problem and breaking it apart into small bites. That's what I think really enables and embodies that fail fast, learn faster mindset, to be able to start something hard in a focused, small way with an intent to scale quickly. And that actually takes some vision and some leadership, because the technology is there to do it. The question is, how do we actually apply it to our business and drive adoption?
Mm-hmm. And I think you both mentioned about failing fast, but what role does behavioral data play in helping you actually feel smarter as well? Dave, I don't know if
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I think it tells you if you're failing. I think that building this sort of ontological model of a business ecosystem, a digital twin of a domain, it's really designed around how you view your marketplace. And there are these slow moving attributes that we can define about people, places, and things. And that actually gives you this structure. And by the way, generative AI models are terrific as providing input to that supervised model of your business domain. And there's other places where generative AI can create, work as a operational channel, go to market channel, as long as you give it the right guardrails. The ability to see that it's actually all the transactional data, in whatever form it may take, that actually informs the associations and creates the ratings of which products belong on which shelves in which neighborhoods and why. And how can I actually turn that into not just action, but action based on understanding and business logic. And so the behavioral data comes in many, many forms. What do people click on a website? What ads do people respond to? What did they take off the shelf and put in a cart and pay for at point of sale? So it's really thinking very broadly about all these different data sources, because they don't actually have to be fused into a normalized data model. They actually get transformed into a normalized market model. And that's the art of the possible that people need to learn to work with and embrace, to be able to move at this pace of competitive change.
Yeah, I would add to that to say the behavioral data that you're gathering that you were just describing, several of those examples are all things that are inputs from shoppers or customers that are happening in reaction to the situation that they're currently facing. One of the beauties of what we do that adds to that is enables the possibility to present them with situations they haven't experienced yet and get a real observed reaction to how they will act if you make X, Y, or Z change to what's existing in the marketplace. And what that opens up is the ability to more systematically explore the options that you might have. And most of our clients are not necessarily going that deep into exploring all possibilities. They're more focused on the couple that are closer in that they think they can convince their retailer partner to execute. But what these AI models really thrive on is having data about all possible situations, because they can tease that apart and understand the contribution that each aspect of that change has to the system. So there's an opportunity there for expanding the behavioral data that we're gathering to a broader level to enable the AI tools to actually be even more effective at predicting what will happen going forward in the future, because they'll be based off of data that continues to expand what might happen in those situations.
Yeah, Rich makes a really great point, because it's that behavioral data that becomes the training data for these predictive models. And these predictive models, if I can create a 90% or better prediction, that can be a game changer for the business. If I had a 90% correct output in an SAP system, it would be a disaster and everybody get fired, right? So the ability to create these predictions that really want more diverse data with all of its imperfections and warts. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to customers and prospective customers, and they say, my data is bad. And you ask, do you use it to run your business every day? And they say, of course. And it needs to be good enough. It doesn't need to be transformed at the data source to power these kinds of predictive and inferential algorithms. That's where the artificial intelligence piece comes in. But the ability to use that to create simulations, this is what I love about what InContext does in terms of creating these simulations of shopper behavior and then extrapolating them. And we do the same thing. We do this for military aircraft, thousands and thousands of Markov chain, simulations and things like that to actually predict the future. the ability to understand your historical transactional data and to be able to tag it, to understand, what situation does that represent? Because then I can begin to train my simulate based on those kinds of patterns or those circumstances. And that's actually what I think where some of the cleverness and some of the art meets the science, and how you bring this ontological view of a business ecosystem and the training data and the simulation techniques to predict the future. Because if what I love about it in context again is to be able to predict what will happen based on an arrangement based on an assortment, which is where we partner together, and to do that without touching a store, to give you a baseline to move quickly and experiment and be a little more bold and a little more agile. Because I actually think that the competitive context is changing, around us every day. That person that Rich and I spoke to a year and a half ago that said, I know I need to do this and I haven't cracked the code of the economics. Now the discussion is more along the lines of, I don't have a choice. Because I don't know if anybody from Aldi is on the webinar, but they're out there, my understanding, right, Rich? They're resetting stores every couple of weeks. And it's almost like in the technology world, the shift from waterfall development to agile development and continuously advancing in small steps. And I wonder if that's not a metaphor that this part of the food industry needs to just really embrace, is how do we actually continuously have a mindset for agile continuous improvement and always be out there. That's where AI will support that kind of continuous dynamic process, if we can actually create the right points of adoption and pivotal roles on the implementation side.
Some really great points, so thank you both. I know we've got a handful of people on the call today, and so they're all wondering, how did they adopt the kind of AI tools that you're talking about, and also that change management mindset? Rich, I don't know if you've got some ideas.
Yeah, I think the key is to start small and take action. As we've been talking about, the culture is sort of anti-change. Nobody really feels comfortable with change, but you kind of have to embrace that and say it's necessary for our organization to grow and to get better. And so it's about picking, an example that you can build on. And so the beautiful part of these tools is that if you pick a category and you pick an application that that you want to look at, like assortment or arrangement or whatever it might be, it allows you to focus in on that and find a solution that will actually increase your sales. So one of the things Dave talked about earlier is, if you're not changing the dial on the outcomes that your business is having, then it's a failure in the grand scheme of things. So by starting small and finding something and getting a success on that can change the game. So for instance, back to the example I was giving, where it's a category reset, if you identify a category reset that actually lifts your category sales, when the success rate is only 15% of them do that, that's going to make you stand out in the marketplace. So as you do that with one retailer, one category, you see that success, it also increases your sales. So there is more dollars to then use to build to the next step and roll that out to other retailers or other categories that you're involved in. And you can sort of build a staircase to the enterprise-wide processes that Dave has been talking about. And so I think there's this challenge has always been, how do I get started? Because it seems like it's a really big problem. And I think the point there is if you start small enough in a way that feels like you could make a change and it would have an impact, and if you are successful in having that impact and it helps pay for the next thing that you would do, I think that's the way to step forward. And I would submit the other thing from our experience is, there's a way to get funding for this by helping the retailers change from testing things live in stores to testing them virtually, which is 96% as accurate to testing it in the real world. You can save about 3/4 of the cost of that in-store test, which is a lot of money, that you could then put towards these kinds of activities, experiments in this space. Dave, what do you think?
No, I think you're all right. And I think it really starts with one of our most valued business partners is a retired Navy two-star admiral who used to run Naval Supply Command, and he's fond of saying, think big, start fast, start small scale quickly, just as Rich said. But I think if you take an incrementalist approach, I don't know that it's going to drive the necessary change to maintain competitiveness if you believe that these markets are dynamic and competition is becoming more intense. And if you don't believe that, if you believe that incrementalism is going to be okay, then you may be in a better position than we know. But I don't actually think that's the world we live in. I think markets are more and more fragmented and dynamic. I think the proliferation of products and services to the point where now 70% of revenue comes from products and introduced in the last 3 years. Yet we continue to see 60, 70, 80% new product introduction failure rates. We continue to see, chronic out of stock problems in certain stores on certain items. We continue to have surplus inventory in certain stores. How do we actually define the problem correctly? And how do we define it in terms that are somewhat transformational without having to go through the big multi-billion-dollar transformation project from hell, right? How do you actually do this by leveraging your existing capabilities and tweaking and tuning them along the way? Because it isn't about implementing all new core systems. It's actually about creating the right points of collaboration between and among the workflows we already have. And this is where most innovation, I think, occurs in the world, is sort of between the silos, between the disciplines of science, between the silos of business. And so how do we actually define the problem? And I think a very good one of those is, how do we actually figure out how to get the 80% of benefit of hyperlocal retail from the 20% of the stores that have that opportunity? And how do I do it in a way that doesn't require me to rewire my core systems and processes? Planogram systems tend not to care how many planograms they have. Pick-pack systems tend not to care how many different permutations there are of what's going into a container, from warehouse to a store. How do we actually understand the role that people and culture play in designing the pathway to take a bite of that opportunity and work it and collaborate on it and use the new kinds of decision-making and execution and simulation tools that exist as an augmentation and accelerator to the business? And I think that getting the problem statement right, getting the use cases lined up in the logical sequence, both in terms of speed to impact, but also the logical orders of operations that exist, and bringing the teams together to do this collaboratively, and really having the folks that are in category management or in account management and product management, brand management, sitting with supply people and figuring out how are we going to actually leverage our existing tools and either create a little workaround or just take more advantage of the functionality by changing how we think and how we plan and how we execute. I actually think that, to me, is where we've seen tremendous success, double-digit results consistently over and over, because the technology is there to create the right outputs and predictions, but it's no good without the execution. So that I would value any opportunities to sit with folks with a whiteboard and actually map that out, because that's actually where the magic happens, is creating the shared belief of what's possible.
Great. Well, thank you both. We've now come to the end of our webinar, but if you have any questions for our speakers today, then please pop it in the chat or message us over email. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences too. Thank you, Dave and Rich, and for all of you for joining us today. If there's one takeaway, it's this. The key for both manufacturers and retailers is to stop failing slowly. Don't let the inertia of past practices or the existing culture prevent change. The opportunity to harness AI tools and the wealth of available data is here, and we need to rethink how stores and categories are managed to enable smarter, faster decisions going forward. Stay tuned for future sessions in the series and feel free to connect with us if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thank you. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.